Thank you for your prayers, not only at hours like this, but at other times. I probably don't express that with the degree of frequency that I should. But you see down at the bottom of the screen, this is it. This is the last lesson in our quarter, and we've looked at how Jesus changes our life. And Jesus was a joyful and enduring individual, and that's what we're going to explore together this morning. The whole premise of the class has been that the Lord has changed our lives, and that process we want to continue. We don't want to ever reach a point where we feel as if we have reached a plateau or a pinnacle where no need for further growth is there. That will always be the case, that we want Jesus to be more and more the centerpiece of our life, the focus, that which we structure everything around. And so let's think about Jesus having an enduring and a joyful mindset or heart. Hebrews chapter 12. If you'll turn there, you probably know what this passage is about, and the little guy on the screen, he helps you understand that. Most of you know that I have, from time to time, used illustrations related to this particular athletic activity, and I enjoy it, and I'll use another one momentarily. But the Hebrew writer, of course, in chapter 11, familiar Bible students of the New Testament will recall, tells us that by faith, the great men and women of the Old Testament did great and mighty things. And that faith was not simply something that they acknowledged by saying they believed it and then took no further action, but rather their faith caused them to act in response to what God told them to do. And so by faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than did Cain. By faith, Noah built an ark. And by faith, Abraham offered up Isaac. By faith, Moses led the people out of Egypt. That's just a quick summary. By faith, Rahab and women like Sarah, they likewise showed and demonstrated their willingness to put their trust in God, and that trust in God prompted them to act in the way that God asked them to, or to behave, to respond in the way that was right. Verse 12, or rather chapter 12, verse 1, begins, as our Bibles are divided, with the word therefore. Based on what has been said, the Hebrew writer now builds on those Old Testament characters, and he said, we also. Think about that. We also. He's including us. Now, to his original readers, they would have understood they themselves to be a part of that pronoun we, but this morning as readers and as Christians following in their footsteps, then we can also include one another. We can include ourselves individually. We also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. There, the idea of the great cloud of witnesses, they would have thought about it perhaps in terms of what would take place, especially in the years following the composition of this book, in Rome at the great Colosseum, in the gladiatorial games. We think of those today as our large sports arenas, and probably all of us, whether it was just a local high school athletic contest at the gym or the football field, or if you've been to some of our other places, a lot of us have been to Knoxville, and when you're in a crowd of that size, it's just a very unusual feeling. It's just a unique environment. And so that's really what he's talking about, not in a way as it pertains to playing a game, but he's talking about life. We are surrounded by those who have run, as he's going to describe at the end of the verse, the race before us. They've already finished, but now they're in the crowd. They're in the bleachers, so to speak, cheering us on. So because these others have given us an example, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares or entangles us. Anything that hinders us, the Hebrew writer says, get rid of it and let us run, there's our word, with endurance, the race that is set before us. Well, we do that with the help of those who cheer us on, who have showed us the way, who run with us now as fellow Christians, as it were, living life together day by day. But also a stronger motivation even than this, we look to Jesus. Verse 2, the author and finisher of our faith. When you read that word author, again, you're thinking of someone who writes a book. The word has a broader meaning than that in this context. You could think about the author meaning the source, the one who made our faith possible, and the finisher of our faith. He started it. He was the one that originated it. He fulfilled the plan of God so as to make it a reality, but He's also the one that as we continue to put our trust in Him, He will finish our faith. He will bring it to completion in His own time and in His own way, according to His will. But He showed us that by His very life. And again, His life is the example for our own, who for the joy that was set before Him, before Jesus, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. He finished. He crossed the finish line. He won. And we can too, and we're willing to keep doing as He did. Verse 3, for consider Him who endured such hostility from sinners against Himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. We want to give up. We want to quit. We want to find some excuse to say, I can't go on. But looking at the example of Jesus will dispel all of those, because He didn't allow anything to stop Him. He endured, He persevered, He kept in running what we call just keep putting one foot in front of another. He kept doing that over and over and over until He finally finished the race. The Greek word would be spelled, if you were using Greek characters, I'm going to brag them. Here's where I guess the money I spent for my education comes in. You would say Alpha, Gamma, Omicron, Nu. Or if you were to transliterate it, you would say AGON. That's the Greek word for race or contest or struggle. AGON. Do you know an English word that starts at least with those four letters? And we put an additional letter on it that sometimes serves as a vowel, but this time as an ending. AGONY. Agony. I know what some of you are thinking. That's what exercise is. It's agony. Well, you're probably right. It means to struggle. I wanted to put up, but I didn't. But some of you, I guess, that are maybe my Facebook buddies, I don't know how Facebook does everything, but tagged in a picture. Every third Saturday in September for the last 15 years, I've participated in a 5K, 3-mile, 3.1 mile race in Gainesboro. For a lot of years, I was one of the organizers of the event. I stepped aside from that role a year or two before we moved here, but nevertheless, every year, except for the COVID year, we had to do it in a virtual way, but we run a 3.1 mile course. And this year I was able to run it again. And my goal is to kind of keep beating my time from the previous year. And this year I'm bragging I was able to do that. But they've got photographers out on the course, taking pictures of the runners and all of that. And so they've got a picture of me right as I pass the 2-mile marker. So you're on the last mile. You have to turn and go across a bridge over it's the backwater of the Cumberland River back into town, and they got me mid-stride, and I've got kind of this, look on my face, and I've got a grimace, to say the least, because my lungs and my heart and my legs and my knees and my ankles and all of that, screaming in pain. You need to stop, but my mind's telling me if you just got one more mile to go, you can do it. You can make it, and I did. But I don't know that maybe I have. I forget. I've got it categorized, or I've got it all compiled in my computer file somewhere. But at one point, when I was writing bulletin articles. When I preached in Overton County, I wrote a bulletin article about a question that I believe it was Adam who asked me. It might have been Adrian or Adam or Anderson. But anyway, when they were little, where we were living at that time, I could run a little loop and they could play out in the yard. So I'd let Amy, this is going to sound terrible, but of course, she had been with them most of the day and homeschool stuff like that. So we'd go outside and play, and sometimes I'd just try to get a little exercise in, and I'd run my loop, and they'd play in the yard so I could keep my eye on them and stuff like that. And I was, running that loop and, coming by, just, hauling at them, boys, you okay? Yeah, we're okay. And so I was running that loop, and one of them asked me later on, maybe after we'd come in, got cleaned up, eaten supper, whatever, Daddy, do you like to run? And I thought, well, that was a funny question, but I supposed it came from them just watching me being outside. Little boys run and play; that's what they do. But grown older men, as they probably perceived me at the time, and rightfully so, and still do. Do you still run and play when you get older? Well, Daddy, do you love to run? I said, well, yeah, I enjoy that. I enjoy the physical activity. And then their deadpan response was, well, it sure doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like it when you run by, because the look on your face says that's not very enjoyable. And you're right, if you watch someone run, a lot of times they don't look like they're having a lot of fun. They don't always have a smile on their face. Now, we could take that and maybe extrapolate it to living the Christian life. And we sometimes, as Christians, we walk around with a sour disposition. We kind of have the Mr. Ed look. We've got the long face. And there's something to be said about what we present to the world as to the joy that we should have as Christians. But there are times in life when even living life as a Christian, we're going to have an agonized look on our face. We're going to have a look of concern and worry and trouble. And that's just natural. What that should be balanced by, of course, is a feeling that overrides it, which is confidence and assurance and gratitude to God for all the blessings that He gives us and the assurance that He provides in His Word about His promises. But still there are times when it's hard, when it's not easy. But Jesus is one whose example, again, always stands at the forefront of what we're trying to do. So as we run this race that is the Christian life, and certainly that's what all of us are endeavoring to do this morning, run it with endurance. Run it with perseverance. Run it even though it's agonizing. It's set before us because Jesus is at the finish line waiting for us. Now, I will tell you, and this is just, I'm going a little bit off topic. I've got to hurry up to get to my other slides, but just for an off-topic purpose, those of you, and I know several of you have enjoyed running before, there's something about seeing the finish line that helps. If you're able to see the finish line, it just provides you motivation, even if you want to quit. Now, sometimes that finish line doesn't come into sight until the last little bit of the race. Sometimes it's more visible at a greater distance, but for whatever reason, your mindset, your mentality, when you're in the midst of that sort of agony, the finish line is in sight. You can keep running. You can typically keep going, and you can finish, and then kind of collapse in exhaustion later. And so the Hebrew writer, he may be telling us here something in that sort of between the lines or kind of subsurface. Look to Jesus. He's at the finish line. Now, of course, the right reply would be, but preacher, I can't see Jesus, and you can't see Jesus either. Oh, I see the pictures of what He looks like on TV. Jonathan Remy or however they say that. Is that what Jesus looked like? Well, He's probably a better representation than some of the medieval painters that painted Jesus as a fair-skinned, brown-haired European guy. But we don't know what He looks like, and we can't see Him in person, but by faith, we look to Jesus. We see what He did at the cross. We see the words on the front of this table. The Lord's Supper is a time to pause every week, or really not just to pause, but as we start a week, it's the time to really just kind of set our minds and say, okay, this week upcoming, the race is about to begin for this new week, but I'm focused on Jesus. I've seen Jesus at the finish line. I know He's out there, and I know He's waiting for me, so I'm going to endure. I'm going to persevere. I'm going to press on. And that's really what we're talking about this morning. What have you started that you've not finished? Have you got some things on that list? I've probably got more things on that list than I should, and maybe you do too. Maybe it's some sort of home improvement project, and I know don't elbow your spouse Thankfully, mine's not in here, and she knows that I'm not a home improvement guy either, to say the least. But maybe you were going to do something, a home improvement project. Well, you kind of got started, but you didn't really finish it. Maybe it was, some other, something for self-enrichment. Maybe you wanted to learn a new skill that you thought would help at work, and that was 40 years ago, and you never finished that. Maybe it was some new hobby that you wanted to take up. Maybe you wanted to learn, some sort of crafting skill, or you wanted to do something again that was just supposed to be fun, and you started it, but you never finished it. Well, we're good, typically, a lot of us, at starting without finishing. The Christian life, however, should never be classified or put in that category or drawer, if you will. We've all got the proverbial junk drawer in our house, or maybe multiple ones, or junk rooms or junk closets, things that are no longer useful. Christianity doesn't belong there in that drawer of things that I started but I'm just not going to finish. Sadly, for a lot of people, that's what's happened along the way. I know those of you that have been here even more years than I have, you can look around and in your mind's eye, you can see them, can't you? You can see the folks who started, but they're no longer running in the race that we call the Christian life. Now, some of them, thankfully, we can rejoice and say, and sadly, the way that we look at things, or the way that I might evaluate them, too many since I've been here, I can point and say, that's where she sat. That's where brother so-and-so was for so many years. They've run the race. They've crossed the finish line. We rejoice with them that they're resting. They've completed the race. But others, they've just dropped out of the race. That's where they were. That's what they were doing. They started, but they didn't finish. And how tragic that is indeed. Should we finish everything we start? Some people have that mentality that no matter what it is, I'm going to start it, I'm going to finish it. And if it's a good thing, there's, I think, something to be said about perseverance. That's what the Hebrew writer is telling us. But it could be that we need to step back sometimes and evaluate, is this really something that I should finish? There are times when we start things that are even good things that may detract us from the great things. And that can happen individually, that can happen in families, that can happen in congregations. So we have to walk this fine line of starting and finishing. And what do we finish that we've started, that we've give up on, that we shouldn't have? What do we maybe start and realize maybe that it's not worth finishing or keeping on or continuing in that we should stop and maybe reevaluate and put our energies elsewhere? And so those are important questions to ask. Think about the resistance that Jesus faced. We're thinking about Jesus having a mindset of endurance or a heart of perseverance. Verse 3 of Hebrews chapter 12, where we were at a little bit earlier. Consider him who endured such hostility from sinners. Those are strong words. Consider Jesus who endured, who persevered, who pushed through, who didn't allow these things to stop him or at least grind his work to a complete halt. At times they thwarted him. At times, he had to stop and, deal with them, but they never made him quit. That's maybe the important point to make. And what it was is, the Hebrew writer describing it, hostility from sinners. Now, in one sense, because Romans 3:23 says we all sin and fall short of the glory of God, we might be able to put ourselves into verse 3 in one fashion. But in another, I don't think that's what the Hebrew writer is really intending. He's not talking about because we're all sinners, Jesus had to die for us. That's true. The Bible, the New Testament teaches that with certainty. But here I think he's more describing those who were really adamantly opposed to his work. Hostility from sinners. And you might say, well, who are those? Or what are you talking about in that regard? Well, think about just a few of these examples. And we'll turn and read these passages carefully when we think about the opposition that Jesus faced. And it came from a variety of sources. And this first one may be among the most surprising. Those of you that have been here on Sunday nights know that we started back in 2023 a study of Mark. And we went through this section probably back in maybe March I don't remember exactly when we covered this section of Mark, but it was probably March of 2023, so you've probably forgotten. But the Bible says, as Jesus begins to work miracles, as He begins to preach, as His popularity begins to soar, the multitudes would just swarm Him everywhere He went. And in fact, verse 20 says, the multitude came together again so that they could not so much as eat bread. They didn't have time to stop and eat. There wasn't even enough room, it seems, for them to put their elbows out to find, the time and the opportunity to eat. That's how popular and how the crowds just pressed upon Jesus at this point, early stage in His ministry. Look at verse 21. This is some of that resistance I'm talking about. It's surprising, shocking. When His own people heard about this. Who's His own people? He's not talking about, Mark's not describing His own followers, Christians, those who will later be called. He's not talking about the 12 that He selected to be apostles. He's talking about His family. That's how the word would be used there in the original context. His own family, His kinfolks, to put it in Southern terminology. When His own people heard about this, they went out to lay hold of Him. And lay hold is another strong term. It means you just kind of grab and exit stage left. For they said, what's their rationale? He is out of his mind. Now, I know, and we could probably all tell multiple stories if we went around person to person, something that a family member said to you that was inappropriate, that was hurtful, that was an incorrect, judgment or evaluation of your character. Might have come from a parent, might have come from a spouse, might have come from even a child or a sibling or whoever. And maybe some of those things, things are said in jest. We talk about, my family tree is filled with fruits and nuts. If you have a family tree like that. A lot of us do. We like to kid around with our family. We like to joke with them. This doesn't seem to be one of those occasions where the family of Jesus is just kind of ribbing Him and trying to give Him a hard time in a fun sort of way. They're genuinely concerned. He's out here claiming to be the Son of God. Who does he think He is? Now, we don't know several things that would cause us maybe to question what's Mary doing. Joseph is not mentioned after the incident in the temple recorded when Jesus was 12 in Luke chapter 2. When He begins His ministry, Joseph is always spoken of kind of in the past tense, so we assume the general biblical consensus is Joseph died sometime between the time when Jesus was 12 and the time when He started His ministry at age 30. We can't prove that with certainty, but that's usually the best guess given. So, what part did Mary play in this process? Did she go tell Jesus had at least 4 other brothers? We know from John chapter 7. Did she order them, boys, go out and get your brother? He's crazy. He's went off the reservation, or whatever other type of pejorative terminology and phraseology we want to use. I don't know. But that was resistance that Jesus had to persevere through. He is out of his mind. His own people wanted to stop Him. His own family tried to stop Him. Think about what Luke tells us in Luke 4:29. Again, this is in the context we're trying to see Jesus was one who endured. Jesus was one who persevered. No matter the opposition, He wasn't going to quit. Now, if your family felt that way about you, it'd be tempting to quit, but Jesus didn't. Luke chapter 4. The Bible tells us in verse 16 of that chapter, He goes back to Nazareth. Goes back home. There's something to be said. I can't remember the author. I wrote an article about it just a couple of months ago that wrote the book, There's No Place Like Home. And of course, that's what Dorothy says at the end of The Wizard of Oz. Going back to Kansas, there's no place like home. If you grow up in one area, increasingly fewer people actually spend all of their childhood or all of even their life in one particular place, but some people do. A lot of times when you drive into town, maybe at the city limit sign, they'll have some other signage that says home of. If you drive into Gainesboro, the county seat of Jackson County, where we grew up, you'll see a sign that says home of Jamie Daly. you're not a bluegrass fan, that name doesn't mean much to you. But if you're a bluegrass music fan, you know that Jamie Daly is the Daly part of Daly and Vincent. Very highly regarded, very successful bluegrass duo, he and Darren. And the band, they've made a very good living for themselves. But Jamie was born and raised, grew up in Gainesboro, so he's the favorite son, I guess, of Gainesboro. If you drive into Livingston from Highway 111, you'll find a sign that says home of Captain Mike McCulley. And Captain McCulley was the shuttle commander of, I think, Discovery. When the Discovery space shuttle went to space, Captain McCulley, who grew up in Livingston, he was at the helm. He was piloting that shuttle. So he's a favorite son. And others, we could think about. So Jesus goes back to Nazareth. Shouldn't they put up a sign and say, this is where Jesus grew up? Aren't we happy about him? Aren't we thankful for the good work that he's going to do? The Bible says after he read in the synagogue, which was his normal custom, worshiping with people he had worshiped with all of his life, the people, verse 28, were filled with wrath. Verse 29, rose up and thrust him out of the city. Now this again is language that doesn't suggest that they're just kind of coming up and patting him on the back and saying, you might want to think about, changing your tactics a little bit, or, maybe you want to soften your message, or, this isn't any sort of gentle cajoling here. This is violent. They led him to the brow of the hill. And interestingly enough, biblical geography confirms that Nazareth was built on a hill overlooking a valley that led back to the Sea of Galilee. So this is completely accurate what Luke is telling us. They led him to the brow of that hill on which their city was built, and they might throw him down over the cliff. They're going to get rid of him. That's what they want to do. Jesus passes through the midst, doesn't allow that to happen. So he's not the favorite son. John 7, I mentioned these guys a little bit earlier. Now Jesus is later on in his ministry, and the Bible says the feast of the Jews was happening. Verse 3 of the chapter, I don't have verse 3 on screen. His brothers, his earthly brothers, physical brothers, 4 of them at least, say, depart from here, go into Judea. Advertise. You say you're the Son of God, go up to the feast. No one does anything in secret. Show yourself to the world. But he stayed back in Galilee. And so when he finally does go to the feast, in John chapter 7, verse 12, the Bible says there was much complaining among the people concerning him, saying, some said he is good. Others said, no, on the contrary, he deceives the people. So there's opposition, is what I'm trying to show you. With Jesus, everywhere he went, even from the people who should have accepted him. John 8:48, the Jews, there the Jews probably just a stand-in word for the Jewish religious leaders. If you read the entirety of the chapter, that'll become obvious. They said to him, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Now that was the most insulting thing that could be said to another Jewish man by other Jewish men in this time. You're a Samaritan. Furthermore, you have a demon. You're a worker of the devil. Those were just 4 of the examples that could be cited among others that I've given you concerning the resistance and opposition that Jesus faced. I know you faced opposition. You faced people that might try to discourage you from living the Christian life. Did any of them rise to this level? Maybe they did. I don't know. Brother Don could tell you about what he experienced in India back last Tuesday. Ask him about that. And that was certainly something that might rise closer to this level than anything I've ever experienced. But you keep persevering. You keep going on. What makes for joy? She looked happy. I'll just go through her really quick. What makes heaven rejoice? We said that Jesus had a joyful heart. He had an enduring heart. And I had to combine this one because I was gone one more week than I thought. So let's close very rapidly by noticing what makes for joy in heaven. What causes there to be, if you will, happiness in heaven? Now, you might respond and just say, well, isn't everyone in heaven happy all the time? Well, in one sense, I guess you could say that is true. But still, Jesus in Luke chapter 15 gives us three specific instances concerning 3 things previously lost, but 3 things that having been previously lost were then found. 1 sheep out of 100. That sheep was found by the shepherd. sought for it diligently. And when he found it, he laid it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he came home, he had a party. I found my sheep which was lost. Is Jesus just talking about farming customs of the first century Judean world? No, there's a greater point. A far more important reality. Verse 7, I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. Same way in verses 9 and 10. A woman who had 10 coins loses one. Now from a 50% or from a 1% loss to a 50% or to a 10% loss. My math is terrible. I'm sorry. You guys know that. 1% loss, now a 10% loss. Of course, the next story, there'll be maybe a 50, maybe a 100% loss, depending on how you interpret the two sons. But nevertheless, the woman finds the coin after sweeping the house. She calls her neighbors together, and she wants to throw a party because I found that which was lost. Likewise, Jesus said, in the same way, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And then Luke chapter 15 closes with that prodigal son story. And a lot of times attention is paid on the boy that went to the far country and wasted his money on wine, women, and song. Less attention is given to the boy that stayed home. Which boy was lost? In one sense, both boys were lost. One boy's found. One boy, the story ends on a cliffhanger, standing outside pouting instead of going into the party, representing the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees and scribes in verse 2, who had complained against Jesus that he receives sinners and eats with them. But Jesus said the Father, representing His Heavenly Father, that's the takeaway He wants us to make, is joyful, because when a son or a daughter is lost but is found again, that is an occasion for celebration. That should make us joyful. Now, the point in saying that as it relates to Jesus changing our lives is this. We ought to live each day not in a way that we wander off and become lost. That's not what I'm advocating. But I'm saying that each day we rejoice in the fact that Jesus found us. Yes, we found Jesus, but Jesus found us. And when we live in that way, in a repentant, faithful, obedient way to Him, then we can continue to bring joy to heaven. And our task is to go out and look for those also who God is looking for and partner with Him, cooperate with Him to bring them in, so that even greater rejoicing can take place in heaven each day. How has Jesus changed your life? That's what the class has been about the whole quarter. And you'll have to answer that. And I hope you'll keep answering that as you evaluate and look at your life individually. How will you continue to let Him change your life? Again, never reach the point. And it's just a subtle lie that I think the devil wants to whisper from time to time kind of in our ear. I think he wants to say, you've done enough. You're good as you are. You've come far enough. No need to keep studying. No need to keep working. No need to keep, just kind of coast, if you will. That's the danger. Maybe that comes as we advance in age. I don't know. But there's never a time for coasting. There's never a time to say I've arrived. There's never a time to say that I've reached this point, because Romans 8:29 says that God desires that we be conformed to the image of His Son. And that requires continual, constant, day-by-day renewal, updating, betterment, beautifying. And I only do that, but I can only do that with the help of God as I continue to take His Word, investigate it, make application of it into my life, and live according to its precepts, and help others to do the same. Thank you for this good quarter of study. I hope you've learned a little bit of more than you knew when you started. If you have some feedback about any of it, feel free to share that with me. That's helpful. It truly is. If there's something that was just off the wall or that you didn't understand at all, tell me and I'll try to make it better the next time. If you've got suggestions for things that you'd like us to study going forward, give that to me as well. I'd be happy to explore those matters in future quarters of study. Thank you for being with us this morning and this entire quarter for our study together.